Good morning, everyone. Apologies for being a little late, but you are all very, very welcome to the 8th annual White Ribbon event at Camden and Islington Foundation Trust. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jackie Smith. I'm the chair of the trust, and I joined as chair in February of this year, which was perfectly timed to coincide with COVID. So I've spent my life chairing board meetings through this medium, Teams, and we were just saying how frustrating Teams can be. But let's not let that get in the way of what will be a fantastic event with wonderful speakers. And I'm honoured, actually, to be asked to open this. When Shirley said, did I have the time? Well, my first thought was I want to make the time because this is so important. Ending violence against women right now, this year, there is not a more important time. And I was listening to the radio this morning and the terrible statistics around babies and children who've died this year because of COVID, because of poverty, because of what's going on in the world. So this is really, really important. I'm delighted to be here to open it. COVID has gotten in the way of some of the things that we wanted to do this year, but there isn't a more important time to have the drive, the momentum, the energy to put behind becoming a trauma-informed organisation. And that's what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to hear from some great speakers, and you will have an opportunity to put your questions to us, to ask the wonderful experts their views, and to share your comments, your thoughts, because that's what this is about. So I won't go on any longer, other than say, as I say, really, really delighted to be here. And I'm going to hand over to Shirley McNicholas, who I'm sure you all know, one of the most wonderful women in the trust, and I say that genuinely. And she's going to be joined by Dr. Philippa Greenfield, also one of the most wonderful women in the trust. So I'm going to shut up now and hand over to Shirley.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for a lovely introduction. And as you said, sorry that there's been a bit of a delay. That is the technology and the times we're in. Before we get started, as we're trying to kind of model and think about being trauma informed, and I'm kind of speaking to myself as well, that I hope you're in a comfortable space wherever you've logged on from. Comfortable in your seat. I hope you've got a drink, and at any time that you take a break, we may plan a little break. This isn't a very long webinar, but we might plan a little break just to help some colleagues log on. So I've kind of got my hand over my heart to be a bit soothing and to feel my breath. And we're often talking to people with experience of trauma and who use our services about self-care. So I just want to remind you to look after yourself, take some breaths, have a drink, and kind of enjoy our webinar. But also, obviously, these are difficult subjects to talk about, and maybe that's part of why we don't always engage with the issues. So as Jackie said, this is our White Ribbon event. White Ribbon Day is actually on the 25th of November, and we will mark that because our white ribbons, I have got mine on, but our white ribbons that I ordered for everybody haven't arrived, and we hope when those come we'll be able to distribute them around, and we'll think of doing some screensavers and adding some resources around that time. But White Ribbon Day was actually a day that was created by men who wanted to campaign to end violence against women and girls and take responsibility for the fact that this is often where the violence comes from. So we kind of commend men for creating the White Ribbon Day. And as Jackie said, I think we started in 2013, and we had been we had thought about women before 2013, but at that time we became part of a kind of national campaign to embed a cultural change in relation to domestic and sexual abuse. And that was in connection with AVA, which is Against Violence and Abuse. and they funded some workers to work with us as a trust, and that's where we got our little logo that maybe you can see on the programme for today, and how we created ASDA. So I want to kind of appreciate the ASDA network, who are members across the trust, service users and staff who work together to embed a cultural change in domestic and sexual abuse. And over the last year or 18 months, that's really become the foundation also for a kind of trauma-informed model of thinking about domestic and sexual violence. And domestic and sexual violence is one aspect of becoming a trauma-informed organisation. So the White Ribbon events have had different themes over the years, but this one was really to think about some of the more, I mean, domestic and sexual violence perpetrated against women is often hidden, but some of the forms that we're going to hear about today are maybe more hidden and more subtle, and so we wanted to pay attention to those today. And so if we just move to the next slide, I'm just going to give, myself and Dr. Greenfield are just going to give a small overview really of what it means to be trauma informed. And there will be a slight delay with each slide. So what does it mean to be trauma informed is a really big conversation, but kind of most meaningfully really it is us comprehending that we need to think about the fact that most people who come to our services will have experienced some form of trauma, and I will go on to that in the next slide, but it is central to all our work. It isn't just the direct interventions we offer, it's how we communicate non-verbally. It's about all staff, from every cleaner to the chief executive and the chair, how we treat staff, how we create our environments, is really moving culturally to think we actually provide a trauma service in mental health, and it isn't just the trauma team that do that. One of the biggest gateways into thinking about trauma informed is something called routine inquiry. And those words really don't convey how important it is. There is nothing routine about the experiences that people have. But why it was called routine inquiry was because it is so important to ask every single person that we come across questions regarding what has happened to them. So routine inquiry should be embedded in every risk assessment. And you can see it on our care notes and the patient records. It should be on our referral forms and our assessment forms, and it has been CPA policy since about 2008, and yet we're still kind of failing in that duty. So this is for a bigger conversation, and we bring it into all of our training, that routine inquiry is one of the most important cornerstones of being a trauma-informed organisation, because what people tell us overwhelmingly is they don't disclose what's happened to them until somebody asks. They don't know this is a safe place to say it. They've been told not to tell anyone. They are ashamed, they are afraid. So it's really, really important that we have the courage and the professional duty to ask everyone who comes to our services routine questions around what's happened to them. And as you can see, back in 2008, this was from the Royal College of Nursing, but the Royal College of Psychiatry. This is now a real kind of buzz statement that we move from what is wrong with you to what has happened to you, really changing that focus of not blaming the person for the experiences they're having, but asking them what has happened to them to have created this psychological difficulty in their lives. So if we can move to the next slide, please, Caroline. And so we're just, I'm sure lots of you have looked at lots of different trauma-informed models. At Drayton Park, we really learned from someone called Denise Elliott, who wrote a paper around 12 different aspects to create a trauma-informed service for women, and I really used that at Drayton Park to kind of consolidate and give language to what we did there. But see, these are repeated core principles of a trauma-informed approach. And again, it's not trauma-informed care only, because care implies it's only the responsibilities of the therapeutic staff, the clinicians. This is about every single person adopting a trauma-informed approach. So most importantly, with our hearts and minds, that we acknowledge the evidence, and that evidence comes from the shared experience that people convey. This isn't something you can do in a blood test or like infection control. The research and evidence comes from what people tell us and their experience of childhood adversity and trauma, and how we're learning more and more the impact of childhood adversity. That collaboration, a bit like that sentence we had before, what's happened to you rather than what's wrong with you, conveys we're trying to work with you and not doing to you. So what can we do together to help? And this is where people talk about care planning and agreement planning. And actually, we have to acknowledge there's times in some of our services, in the wards and the secure services, people are not in the right moment to do with. Sometimes we have to do to, but thinking about how we do that and stepping back into doing with as soon as possible. So managing both of those aspects. Safety, so creating safe places to work in and to provide services. This isn't about ligature assessments and infection control. Safety is also about the softness of our environments, of not noisily slamming doors, of not carrying lots of keys that can convey fear and terror of being locked in. So creating safety in our environments is more than, and I am going to say some challenging things like the ligature movement that is national. Obviously, it's very, very important how we keep people safe by providing safe environments, but there are unintended consequences in terms of how we remove things from our environments and then how sterile some of those environments and harsh they can feel. So it is really, really thinking about trauma when we think about how we create safety. And we're really doing some of that in our suicide and risk assessment strategy across the trust. So thinking about creating safety, not managing risk. Trustworthiness, you know, we could say so much about that we have to demonstrate we're worth trusting. Why should people trust us until we do some actions that convey to somebody, I am worth trusting, I am reliable, I will earn your trust. And you can do that with, you know, quite quickly with people. People are wanting somebody to trust. And this word compassion that comes up, you know, how do we convey compassion? So, you know, it isn't just being kind, it is really authentically giving somebody your compassion through your body movements, your eyes, your non-verbal communication, demonstrate that you can see the person's pain. And, you know, these are very flippant things to say in one sentence, but it's really important we think about multiple disadvantage, that many people who come to our services have experienced discrimination, racism, homophobia. They come maybe as refugees of immigrants who feel very nervous they might be sent back to somewhere. And so it's really kind of thinking about all of these things. In terms of that multiple disadvantage and how privileged some of us are who haven't lived with those experiences. But it's also not also to think that people who come from these other countries, these other places, don't have strengths and something to offer back. And I think people talk about that even in this COVID time, that we look to kind of America and the West, and actually Africa is doing really well in some really creative things. So it's just really thinking about the positives of every community as well as the disadvantages. And if we move on to the next slide, please, Caroline. As we're waiting for the next slide, it's really some more evidence, should we need it, about why we should think about trauma. So people will have heard of ACEs, which are adverse childhood events, and the number of ACEs you might have experienced really intensify and make it much more likely that you will have a lifetime issue of psychological distress, but also an increased lifetime risk of very serious physical health problems. And so an experience of trauma that is not or adverse childhood events that, where there are not positive interventions in childhood or in adulthood, leads to earlier death of some of these terrible physical health problems, but also the links to suicide, to really, really significant mental health problems that have a dramatic impact on somebody's life. So once upon a time, we used to think that kind of trauma and ACEs were much more linked to people who felt depressed or maybe kind of got to eating disorder services. And we now see this in the much more serious, they're all serious, obviously, but once upon a time, it was much more that the kind of more psychotic range of problems had a kind of genetic component, and maybe they do, but also very much linked to serious mental illness. So research showing very much when we ask people about trauma in early intervention teams, there's a much greater prevalence now of childhood trauma coming up, and the link between childhood sexual abuse and very serious mental health problems. And people with those kind of diagnoses often end up in the more traumatizing aspects of our services, in the secure services and the wards and in prisons. And thinking about that kind of more diverse, and thinking about Black Lives Matter this year, and we did one of our webinars around that. Black men are much more likely to be diagnosed with a psychotic illness and to be detained under the Mental Health Act. But again, is that partly because we're not understanding what has happened to those men? Are we inappropriately diagnosing and missing some of the more trauma? And if we continue to not ask at risk assessment and not explore the past, we miss an opportunity to understand what's happened to somebody. It can lead to misdiagnosis. We give the wrong kind of care planning. And also the person, it compounds those feelings of isolation and shame. So that was kind of just a whistle-stop tour, really, of why we should really be thinking about trauma in all aspects of our work. And I'm going to hand over to my partner, Dr. Philippa Greenfield, who is the medical lead for the ASDA network. So I'll hand over to Philippa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shirley. And can we have the next slides, please, when you're ready, Caroline? So what I'm going to go on to talk about now is about trauma-informed approaches and COVID-19. As Jackie had mentioned, I think none of us can ignore this as what has really taken up everybody's minds in the last year and continues to. And I want to talk really about how a trauma-informed approach has felt so important as we've encountered the first wave, are embarking on the second wave, and certainly as we go on to plan for subsequent recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. On the slide here, if people can see, I've put a quote by Judith Herman that people may be familiar with, but she's an American psychiatrist whose work has really focused on trauma and recovery from traumatic experiences. And she talks about the core experiences of psychological trauma being disempowerment and disconnection. And I think that we can all agree that feeling powerless and isolated have been central to people's experiences during the pandemic. If we can reflect, so I've put on this diagram here some of the themes that I feel have come up in terms of difficulties, traumas, stresses, and if we can have the time to reflect on some of these. So these particular things that people have faced in the pandemic, I think from looking at these various things in the bubbles there, I think we can be clear that the pandemic has been a testing time for everybody. And it comes with unique stresses that many won't have encountered before. For example, just watching the news, reading the newspapers, social media, talking to our colleagues or in our own networks, there's been a real culture of fear about the virus, the publication of daily death rates, and various often conflicting narratives or conspiracies about the causes and consequences of the virus that have really fed into a real fear. In addition, there'll be people who've encountered sudden and traumatic bereavements as a consequence. And also we have to think about the frightening experiences that people who have been hospitalised by the virus will have been through. But as we know, the pandemic has not had an equal impact on all. And those who have had past experiences of adversity and trauma, whether that be in the form of abuse, neglect, discrimination, whatever these past adversities and traumas have been, they'll be at particular risk of adverse psychological and social harm as a result of what we're going through now. Particularly relevant to today's White Ribbon event, for example, let's please consider the experiences of those who've previously been victims of domestic and sexual abuse, and what their experiences may be now of being locked in, having to wear a mask, or hospitalised and having to wear a nebulizer or even be intubated. We know in addition that certain communities have and will experience multiple bereavements and losses. And with the recognition that the pandemic has exacerbated existing structural inequalities, with those who are already marginalised or disadvantaged being disproportionately affected as a result of not having the protective or mediating factors or buffers that others might have in place, financial, housing, how this is really going to be a much more difficult time for some. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Because following on from that, what I'm going to just highlight in the next slide is the direct harms that we've seen have been faced by women and girls during the pandemic. I'll carry on anyway, but we know that at times of humanitarian crisis, whether that's war, natural disaster, or times of disease outbreaks such as now, that violence against women and girls increases, and that is felt the most by marginalised groups. I think that there's nobody here today who won't have heard, as Jackie had mentioned opening the webinar today, of the serious harms that women and girls have experienced as a result of domestic abuse during lockdown measures, where individuals have been isolated at home, often with their perpetrators, and restricted access to seeking help. Some of you may have read the very important report by IMCAN, which has really highlighted how the impact has been felt even more by Black women and girls. And thinking again just about our services and women and girls within our services, I also want to highlight the high rates of suicide and self-harm we've been seeing nationally during this time. And if we can go on to the next slide, I suppose what I want to really go back to highlight though is how a trauma-informed approach can really help us to support us through the acute and recovery phases of the pandemic, and also moving forward as we continue our services. By using the knowledge that we have about the effects of trauma, we can ensure that the support we offer people who use our services and also our staff really aids recovery rather than doing any further harm. To tell you a bit about how this has looked in practice and some of the work we've been trying to do within the Trust, through the ASDA network and Safeguarding Hub, we've been using all opportunities we have had to provide training events and webinars on topics such as how to be trauma informed, and particularly on domestic and sexual abuse and routine inquiry. The staff networks and trust webinars that Jackie has been leading on, the webinars, have also been encouraging us all to listen to a wide range of voices that we have amongst our staff and those that use our services. And hopefully with events like today, we'll be able to hear further from voices that still remain hidden. Listening to the concerns and needs of staff, the ASDA network has responded in developing resources for our staff. For example, staff were finding they were in a position of reported they were encountering more situations where people were reporting being acutely at risk from others, and were wanting more confidence in how to respond to this in a timely way. So we developed our staff safety planning sheet, and we hope that initiatives such as this aren't just about providing staff support and confidence to managing these situations, but are really a reminder of the importance of routine inquiry. So asking everybody that we see in our services about their safety and about their risk from others as well as to others, because as Shirley highlighted previously, we're still not doing this. This is not just us within our organisation, this is across healthcare. We're still not asking these questions, and we know as healthcare professionals that we're in a unique position to hear and to help. So again and again, what we know from research is that people who have these experiences are much more likely to disclose to a healthcare professional than they are to anybody else. I suppose just to mention a few other things within the Trust, through collaboration with our wellbeing services, we have been focusing, for example, on raising awareness and establishing confidential supports for staff who may be affected themselves by domestic and sexual abuse during this difficult time. And we've continued to work in partnership with Solus Women's Aid and Camden Safety Net, in particular through links with our Trust embedded independent domestic violence advocates, and also working with our wider networks to share knowledge, updates and expertise. And at the end of the slide here, I've just put a few links and a few of the resources that have been more nationally available and focus particularly on healthcare staff and how we can be trauma informed in our response and really respond to the needs of women and girls during the pandemic. So I hope the brief overview that Shirley and I have given has given you just a little bit of an idea about what trauma-informed approaches can offer to us all in our work. At this point, I had hoped to hand over to Andy Rose, who is somebody who has experiences of using our services and is an active and core member of both our Women's Strategy Group and our ARSA network. And she was going to speak a few words to talk about cultural awareness. Unfortunately, I don't think she has managed to get on with the technology, but I think that Shirley has a copy of the words that she had hoped to share with us. So I'll hand over to Shirley to speak to those words. Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you, Philippa. I'm really sorry that Andy can't read these words, and she's still trying to get in, and I don't know how symbolic it is that a service user's perspective on trauma from a cultural perspective is now being read out by a member of staff. We work very, very closely together. Andy has been on the Women's Strategy Group for 15 years. She's a really active member of ARSDA. In fact, we're talking at a conference in Cork, but virtually on Tuesday. So I just want to really appreciate her input. And it was very much her who was driving the theme of today. I also want to say that after I give Andy's overview, we might need to take a short break. If that might be Salma. Is Salma actually with us? Because we're having technical issues, so we might take a 2-minute break after I say this from Andy. So, from Andy, the importance of having people, services and systems understanding the differences within all cultures and communities is central to how we support and help people heal from trauma. Different cultures have really different understandings of trauma. In some cultures, trauma is seen as shame to the family. Other cultures have beliefs that might seem difficult for us to grasp, and so the help is limited or restricted. This might make it harder for people who've suffered trauma to reach out for help. We need to be culturally sensitive as well as trauma sensitive and understand language used, attitudes, beliefs, family roles and expectations, traditions and other cultural values. We really need to we don't know everything. I think what she said, you can't know everything about people's culture and background, but it's all right to ask somebody what something means that you don't understand. Can they explain more? And show some humility when we don't understand where somebody's come from. And Andy was going to be very pleased to introduce Selma Bayou from the Iranian and Kurdish Women's Rights Organisation, who I'm not sure is with us yet. So we're going to take a 2-minute break and we will come back in 2 minutes. Everybody maybe go to the toilet, get a drink, and we'll regroup in it's 11:39 now. Maybe we'll regroup at 11:45. Thank you very much. Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me. I'm really sorry about our delay, and we're very lucky now to have Polly with us from the Sharon Project. So we're going to move on to Polly's presentation, and she was invited actually by Dr. Greenfield, who'd gone to a really fantastic training event run by the Sharon Project. So I'll hand over to you, Polly. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Thank you so much for that introduction. So my name's Polly and I run a charity called the Sharon Project, and I've been invited here today to talk about harmful practices, and in particular around dowry abuse and domestic servitude. So to start with, I'm going to just give a little bit of an overview of who I am and the work that we do, and then go into addressing two of those key issues.
Yes, thank you, Nassim. Thank you.
Okay.
My goodness.
Great. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about myself. The Sharon Project I founded in 2008, and that was due to the fact that I realised that there wasn't enough support provision for women who had been disowned by their families, women who perhaps didn't self-identify with the terms then around domestic abuse, harmful practices such as honour-based abuse, and even forced marriage. So it was very much led from a need within a lack of support available in the service. So over the years, not only have we been working towards supporting vulnerable women, our age group is typically 18 to 25, so quite a young demographic. Quite often they are South Asian women. We are a South Asian Women Specialist Service, but it's open to everybody. But in addition to the client support, we also do a lot of work on a strategic level to influence and engage with governments to change policies, legislation and strategies. And to do that, we need to be working on a partnership level. So very much around the whole of the work that I do is partnership led and ensuring that we take a multi-agency approach. Can I have the next slide, please? So I think the other way. Thank you. So these are just some of the issues that the women that we support come across, and the areas that we deal with. They often present initially under the term of domestic abuse, and then from that we look at these harmful practices that are listed here. One thing that we absolutely know is that when it comes to any form of abuse, it's very rarely addressed in isolation, and quite often there's an intersectionality between different types of harms and different types of abuse that women experience. And so what we recognise is that not only are they interlinked, but as Andy had mentioned in her words, is that culturally there is a situation around fear of bringing shame on their families or their circumstances, which can quite often lead to being disowned by their families and by their communities, having to be physically removed from their familial environment and having to restart somewhere anew, constantly looking over their shoulder for fear of being found or returned to an abusive situation. So very much there is an underlying current that when women experience any of these harmful practices, then ultimately there is a fear of being disowned and therefore a fear of speaking out. And I think that also lends itself towards the trauma that they also experience. Can I have the next slide, please? So I've been asked to talk about two things, one being dowry, which is a type of harmful practice that is very rarely spoken, and because it's such a hidden harm and it happens in plain sight, it's very difficult for anyone to identify it unless you actually sort of start asking the questions about what it is. So I think there are many different definitions, but ultimately it's seen as the transfer of a female's inheritance upon her wedding. And so this isn't something new. This has been happening. Dowry practice has been practiced across many different cultures and communities over many years, including here in the UK. And particularly, it was particularly popular with royalty, with regards to retaining power and position, about transferring that dowry. Now, the initial concept of dowry was seen to be a protective measure, that should anything happen to the wife, then the gold, the money, the assets that she brings into that marriage can be used to support her going forward. But what we're seeing very much is an abuse within that. And because the dowry is often places the value that is held of the woman who's been married. For example, if she has a good dowry, then she'll be treated well. But if she brings to the marriage a poor dowry or a low dowry, then that also can affect the way that she is treated. And I've just put here that it can happen in many different cultures and societies. It's not just one, and it doesn't just happen at any one particular time. The dowry is transferred before, during, and after the ceremony in the marriage. Can I have the next slide, please? So what I wanted to go on to talk about in the next slide is what is dowry abuse and what happens when that dowry is then actually used and manipulate and control that person. Well, because we know that when it comes to violence, it can happen at any time. It quite often arises, particularly within South Asian communities, but not exclusively, where the bride would then go from being married to go living with the in-laws, and therefore we would have, houses with intergenerational households. And it's quite often, unlike domestic abuse, where it's quite often a partner or a former partner that you've had an intimate relationship with, dowry-related abuse is very much linked to honour-based abuse, where there are multiple perpetrators, where they are highly motivated, very well protected in their actions and their activities. And again, this can often arise where demands for further dowry after the marriage takes place, and failure to provide that can consider that particular bride or that woman to be a cheap bride, and therefore face the consequences of honour-based abuse in relation to the dowry in that particular marriage. And because it involves multiple perpetrators, it can be very difficult to identify who the perpetrators are. It could be the mother-in-law, it could be granny sitting in the corner, it could be the husband, or it could be a completely different family member or a member of the community. So again, some of the most common types of dowry-related abuse that we see are listed there around physical violence, marital rape, domestic servitude, immigration, visa control, and financial and economic abuse. And it's that economic abuse that really sort of outlines the long-term impact that this type of abuse has. It's quite often brought to our attention with regards to immigration queries, particularly for women with no recourse to public funds, those who have arrived here on a spousal visa or have an unstable security with regards to their status. And again, it's these issues that are often used to control and manipulate that victim with regards to the dowry. For fear of saying something, they would suspect that they would be then deported or they would face further consequences. So when we look at whether this is an issue in the UK, we don't currently, in our statistics and our data collection, carry those records. But we do know that whilst the extent of dowry-related abuse is unknown, but it is a prevalent issue because we see it all the time. And it's a hidden practice, and it's completely reliant on the victim coming forward. And again, with any form of trauma, just even speaking about some of these issues can actually trigger further traumas for that individual. And as I mentioned before, as with honour-based abuse, quite often these harmful practices come to the attention of services, including the police, under the umbrella of domestic abuse. But without that cultural understanding and without that awareness of what else is going on, it can be very easily ignored or missed. And the practice of dowry, although it's not a crime in the UK, the elements of dowry, which we will go on to next, is very much criminal offences that have a direct physical and emotional impact on that victim. Can I have the next slide, please? So these statistics really quite surprised me when I first came across them, and that is that in the UK, average British wedding costs around £21,000. We're talking the top level of a wedding, but when it comes to an Asian wedding, we're talking between £50,000 to £250,000. That's a huge amount of money for a wedding, by any stretch. But when we look at that, the British Asian wedding industry in the UK pre-COVID was worth £3 billion every year. And that's everything from venues to catering to clothing to gifting, a whole range of different suppliers that are required. We recognise that it's a significant number, and when it comes to the economic side of the abuse that's experienced, we can also see that come forward as well. Now, in Birmingham, there was an Asian wedding dress that was designed in Soho Road, and it cost £100,000. And it was it didn't have Swarovskis or stones. It was actual real diamonds embedded into this dress. It was gold thread. It was rubies and sapphires. £100,000. And what I'm trying to say is, with such an investment, a financial investment in these types of weddings that reflect the importance of dowry, and particularly the investments made between the families, because again, culturally, it's very rarely two individuals who are getting married, it's two families that are being joined together. So is it any wonder that if somebody did want to say no to a wedding or a marriage, that they would be reluctant to do so, because all this investment has already taken place? Can I have the next slide, please? So what I also wanted to do is say, when we talk about dowry and we talk about domestic servitude, as you can see in that bubble of words on the screen, there is so much more that is going on. And we've seen in high profile cases, particularly of honour-based abuse, but also with regards to dowry concerns, that actually there is an interlink between all of these types of assaults and crimes, but also forms of abuse. I recall one particular case where a client had actually got married to somebody and arrived in the UK, and she was being treated very badly by the in-laws and her husband, so much so that the physical violence continued to the point where they actually had a knife to her throat. She managed to lock herself into a bathroom and she called the police, but she didn't know the phone number. She Googled the number for 999. Such was the lack of information that she had. When the police arrived, she was extremely relieved that they had attended. However, when she had told the police that she couldn't leave the property without her dowry, they just simply looked at her as if this was a matrimonial issue, and that it was an immigration question, as opposed to the fact that the dowry, without that dowry, she could neither go back home to her family without it, nor could she continue to financially support herself in the UK, because they would have cancelled her visa. So quite often the understanding behind dowry is far greater than the word itself. Could I have the next slide, please? So there was just a slide beforehand which looked at domestic servitude, and it highlighted some of the articles of cases that have actually reached the media, and it involves basically the fact that alongside dowry abuse comes domestic servitude, and quite often that can involve being held within the household, not being allowed to leave, having to get up very early in the morning and cook and clean for the entire household, and not being allowed to go to sleep until, again, very early, the early hours of the morning. So controlling what people can do, controlling what they can eat, where they can go, and although we quite often think about domestic servitude as being people being brought into households to serve, to clean, from overseas, quite often what we also see is women who arrive in the UK, or actually British nationals in many of the cases that we've dealt with, being treated ultimately like slaves within the household, whether that's in relation to the dowry not being enough, or whether it's an extension of all the other types of harmful practices that they experience. So on this slide that we have now, it really shows the impact that both dowry and domestic servitude have on individuals and victims. And one of the key things that I really wanted to bring out here was around the economic abuse that's experienced, because they're not allowed to leave the house, because they're not allowed to get a job, because they're not allowed to access health support or any other kind of level of support. It means that their economic resources are so limited that actually it's a much wider issue when it comes to, rather than looking at just one thing, we need to look at the broader long-term impact that these issues can have. It'll involve being isolated from your family and friends and your community, being taken out of school or education in order to ensure that that power and control can be continued to be allowed to continue, and also restrictions on social media. And at the end of this piece, I'd like to read something to you guys that will encapsulate all of these impacts that women experience. In others, and again, we come back to the notion of shame, bringing shame or being disowned. Again, when people say, well, why doesn't she just leave? It quite often is never that easy, and quite often it is seated within a cultural understanding or a cultural perception that by doing anything against the family name will bring further shame on herself and her immediate family. For some women, when it comes to dowry and domestic servitude, when they've served their purpose, they may, in the eyes of their perpetrators, they may be sent back to their countries back home, and then left there without any legal recourse to return to the UK. Or in the case that I mentioned earlier with the lady who actually called the police, she was then made homeless because they refused to let her back into the house. Why? Because she called the police. So, and again, we see in extreme cases, severe physical attacks and murder. Can I have the next slide, please? So when we look at dowry and we look at domestic servitude, it's also really important that we look at what positive action that has been taken and what further action can be taken. So in response to a conference that we held a few years ago, a National Police's Conference in Birmingham, one of our survivors actually spoke about the dowry abuse that she had experienced, and the role of the police within her particular case. Again, not being believed, not having that cultural understanding to understand the terminology. So one of the officers who, out of 500 people in that conference, actually went away and came back with a policing response to dowry. And what that showed us was that from 1897, there is existing legislation to address dowry with regards to a policing response. It just took one person to be very creative to identify the various steps that are required with the laws that currently exist in order to ensure that the victim feels supported and that she feels believed. Can I have the next slide, please? So, as well as the police, it's also our responsibilities as charities and NGOs to also be part of that solution. But we know that we can't do that on our own. And that's why we need to be working with all professionals and partners to ensure that we all play our role in supporting these victims and survivors. So some of the things that we can do as charities is to provide that cultural support, that empathy and care, and having that cultural understanding either through lived experiences or through the work that we do. Survivors and victims will feel more likely to come forward and more likely to disclose. And if they are to disclose on one harmful practice such as dowry, chances are we'll then start to see all the other harms that are taking place as well. So what I'm saying is multi-agency partnership is absolutely vital. It's so key that if you suspect or you ask the questions around what's happening to somebody in your care, that you know that there is a chain of other organisations that can also provide that additional support. It may be that we speak the same language. It may be that because the cultural sensitivity of these issues, that they feel more secure or comfortable talking about those issues. In one of the cases that we've dealt with, at one point we even arranged to have an expert come into court to produce a report so that the judge had a better understanding of what dowry was. And this was in response to the furthering of abuse through the court system that she experienced from her perpetrators. And so again, there are resources available out there, whether it's to better understand the issues or whether it's to provide additional support to your clients. Can I have the next slide, please? So other ways in which we identified ways to respond to dowry is through the court system. So again, I've listed here just a few sort of links as to what the fact is that dowry is defined and addressed within the judicial system in the UK. In addition to that, in 2018, we trained Crown Prosecution Service in London, and I'm really pleased to now see that actually dowry is referenced as part of their training for all forced marriage prosecutors, because again they can see the correlation between those two harms. In addition to that, the police have also updated their toolkits and their aid memoirs to ensure that when they're looking at honour-based abuse, that they're also looking at dowry and domestic servitude. But at this point, it's great that we have taken steps towards better raising awareness of dowry and understanding the impacts of it, but there's still more we can do. So what are the responses, for example, from social services, from housing teams, from legal representatives, from detention centres and the health and education professionals that we have here in the UK? My ask would be very much to find out more about dowry, find out more about the domestic servitude, use your professional curiosity to ask those questions to your clients to see what else might be going on, because without that we won't be able to completely address the issue on our own, but in ensuring that we have the most appropriate response in place means that that victim or that survivor will get the best support that they need. Can I have the next slide, please? So I hope I've still got a few more moments in my slot. What I would like to do at this point is to read a blog which was written by one of our ex-clients and is available on the URL on the screen. And she wrote this in regards to her experiences on some of the areas that I've just spoken to you about now. And it was following a story that was posted a few years ago by Farrell Khan, Imran Khan, the boxer's wife, where she went onto social media to talk about the abuse she was experiencing from her in-laws. So I'm just going to read from her own words, one of our survivors who kindly shared her story in order to inspire, educate, and empower others to come forward. He caught my eye at a wedding and things started out like a fairy tale. He was the most charming man I'd ever met. He was so caring, wanted to know all my problems, gave me assurances to confide in him, my deepest troubles, failures in my past relationships, my insecurities and intimate details about myself and my family. I felt like this is what I was waiting for all my life. But little did I know that my dreams of marriage, a happy home, with a man who loves me more than his own family and friends, as he said, a man who I wanted to have kids with, all of this would turn into my worst nightmare. Leading up to our wedding, I used all my life savings and splashed out on a lavish wedding because this was his dream, and I wanted to make him happy. A few days later, we were on our honeymoon, and he said he was going to change his mobile number and wanted mine to be changed because it was a new start. During our honeymoon, he told me he wanted me to resign from my job there and then because he wanted me to work for his company. And when he decides, he's going to open a company for me to work there. Every instruction by him always seemed to have a valid reasoning, so I never dreamt of questioning him. From the moment we got back home, I noticed my mother-in-law's attitude change completely towards me. No longer was there praise and adoration for her new daughter-in-law, as was played out in front of my family members, and instead there was hate and resentment. She made it clear that my son would always love his mother first. A wife is nothing in comparison. As the weeks went by, it became my duty to cook and clean for the family of 6, fresh breakfasts, lunches and dinners, making shopping lists ready for when I would be taken, accompanied by a family member. Washing everyone's clothes. I even learnt whose underwear belonged to whom. Over the time, my mother-in-law became more and more picky about things that didn't exist, such as creases on the bedsheets or apparent splashes of water around the kitchen sink. And when I would go to clean up after apologising to her, I would find that it was spotless. She deliberately set standards impossible to achieve and then filled my husband's ear about how my mother never taught me how to be a good housewife. The rest of the family just watched or joined in. Eventually, I would get hit for tasks incomplete or not having been completed to the standards they expected. My phone and bank card was taken away from me. Passwords were changed on my social media accounts, laptops and iPad, so none of these were of any use to me anymore. It was made very clear to me from very early on in my marriage that because I did not bring more dowry, they needed to punish me. I was refused access to my friends or family. I wasn't allowed to go see my niece when she was born or go to my grandma's funeral when she passed away, which I still hate myself for till this day. Life became a monotonous realm of fear, waking up with a list of chores to complete from 6 a.m. until 2 a.m. I would pray that they would wake up in a good mood, because if they were in a bad mood, even if there was perfection surrounding them, I would be attacked. Either for the way I looked, being a cheap bride, not being a good cook, or for nothing at all. My mother-in-law would give me chores until the early hours whilst my husband would sleep, and once I was locked out of my marital room, so I had to sleep outside the bathroom on a towel on the floor. My in-laws showed me that there was nothing I could do. I wasn't allowed to register with a GP because I was accused of potentially sleeping with him or her, or snitching on my in-laws. When we did go out, I was too scared to look up in public because I would be accused of knowing this guy or checking him out. Once we went to the cinema as a family and my husband pinched my upper arm really hard, saying, "You slut, how dare you look at him with so much lust," referring to the actor on the screen. Then he would deliberately give me the silent treatment and showed me he was angry in front of his family, who then hurled abuse at me for upsetting their son. I could never win, so what was the point in trying? They became better and better at this game, and I became weaker as time went by. I was told to always smile at family gatherings, especially photos for their social media, and if I did not, I would be beaten. Such was their power to show the world what a good family they were and to ensure no one would believe me if I dared to speak out. I accepted my life to be their forever slave until the police started to come by. Immediately they started to change, making fake promises, crying and begging me never to leave. I should have found the strength to say no, but I wanted to believe them, even though deep down I knew that it was all an act. Eventually I left the marital home, but sadly things did not end there. They still won't leave me alone by fabricating stories about my character to tarnish my reputation in my family, in my community, which is so difficult to ignore, and like Farrell Khan, publicly protest that I am the liar and even a fallen woman. They repeatedly come to me in my dreams, making the trauma very real and difficult to move forward. I'm trying to get back on track, but I'm still nowhere near the finish line. After attempting to take my own life several times, I'm seeing counsellors and psychiatrists to help with my fears and nightmares. I've got a long way to go, but I'm grateful for having left that life as a forever slave, living in constant fear. My biggest support by my side has been my family and the support I received from the Sharon Project, who believed me, and without both, I wouldn't be alive today. We all need to stand together and call it out for what it is, abuse. If you have ever been affected by any of these issues in my story, please do not suffer in silence and contact the Sharon Project. So very powerful words, and again, straight from a survivor of domestic abuse, dowry abuse and domestic servitude, and it really highlights that if you only look for one thing, you miss all the other things that are happening in that person's life. Can I have the next slide, please? The next slide is around questions, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to talk to you all today around dowry and domestic servitude, and I'll be happy to hang around for questions later if required. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. I'm really sorry I came in halfway. It's technical problems this morning. I was trying to get in for an hour. But anyway, I'm here now. And that was really moving. Thank you very much. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Andy Rose. I'm a member of the Women's Strategy Group and also of the ARDSA Group. Work alongside Shirley and other women that use services. And I just wanted to say just a little bit about what we're talking about today. I come from a Cypriot background, and I think it's really important having people, services and systems understanding the differences within all cultures and communities, and it's just central to how we're going to be able to support and help people heal from trauma. Different cultures have different understandings of trauma. In some cultures, trauma is seen as a shame to the family. Other cultures have beliefs that may seem difficult for us to grasp, and so the help is often limited or even restricted. This might make it hard for people who've suffered trauma to reach out for help. We need to be culturally sensitive as well as trauma sensitive and understand language that's used, the attitudes, understanding beliefs, understanding the family roles and expectations and traditions and the cultural values. So I was really moved by Ikro's TEDx, very, very moved actually. And I think Selma is next to speak, so I really kind of welcome her. And yeah, welcome. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Selma. Is Selma with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello,
Selma. Hello. Sorry, I joined a little bit, late. Technical problems. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. So yeah, so my name is Salma Bayou. So I am an IDVA specializing in harmful practices and in particular FGM. So I have been involved with ICROS since 2013, and when I came into work on Ascent project harmful practices as an IDVA specializing in FGM. And prior to that, I have been like in the sector, in the Vogue sector for over 20 years now. So, today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about ICRO, what we do and how we do things, in particular within my department and team. So could I have please the next slide? No, we don't need this one, sorry. Maybe the next one, please. Yes, so ICRO is a registered charity. We are a voluntary organization set up in 2002 by Diana Nami, who is currently our chief executive. Diana set up this organization then because of an honor killing. Her interpret Diana had at the time had an interpreter. Diana came into the UK about 35 years ago as a refugee from she's a Kurd from Iran. So she came in and she didn't speak a word of English. She only spoke Farsi and Kurdish. She had an interpreter helping her access services with her daughter and husband then, and sadly one day her interpreter did not turn up. She asked about her at the agency, and had told her that she was murdered by her husband. So she investigated it further. The interpreter at the time, called Sepia, was taken back home to Kurdistan, Iraq, and was executed by her husband, because he had then suspected her of having an affair with a colleague, because he had found a telephone number, a male colleague's telephone number on her phone list, on her contact list. So Diana was very shocked, because she thought then that these issues of honor killing, honor-based violence, harmful practices towards women from South Asia, North Africa, Middle East, were issues women dealt with just back home in those regions. She was really devastated and had gone to the police, but the police had said, well, actually, we are sorry for the death of your friend. However, the murder happened abroad in Kurdistan. There is nothing we can do about it. This was then the police's approach to a British woman who was murdered abroad. So there was no justice for Sepia. Her husband is now a lecturer at Erbil University in Iraq. He remarried and is alive, very much alive, and having a life and with a wife and children, and has a significant role in his community. So the motivation was that Diana was so frustrated and set up, at the time, ICRO Women's Rights Organization. We expanded now because we work a lot with MENA, Middle East, North African women. So we kept ICRO as a legacy for Diana's work, and then we moved from ICRO Iranian Kurdish Women's Rights Organizations to ICRO Women's Rights Organization. We provide holistic advice, intensive case work, IDVA service, so that's high risk cases for women fleeing domestic abuse, sexual violence, forced marriage, child marriage, and honor-based violence. So we have also counseling in 5 languages. At the moment, actually, it's only Farsi, Arabic, Kurdish, and English. We lost our Kurdish counselor. So we are very keen in training and sharing our expertise, experiences, working with survivors of HPV, forced marriage or harmful practices, and domestic abuse and family and community abuse. So all our training sessions are based on research, on real work with women survivors. We do a lot of institutional advocacies. We at MARACs, MASHs, child protection conferences, national conferences, international conferences also. We provide consultancies to, statutory and voluntary services in the UK and abroad on HPV in particular. Our speciality, our expertise is in HPV and harmful practices within Middle East, North Africa and South Asia, as in Iran, Afghanistan, a little bit Pakistan. So we are keen on campaigning. So we believe that campaigning does bring change, and so was the case in 2015. We managed to criminalize forced marriage. We were very much part of that campaign. We held a campaign in 2006 when Banaz Mahmoud was murdered by her family, and Diana was actually a role. She was the advisor to the Met Police, and in London, in South London, it was Diana Nami who actually had advised the police not to look for a missing person, that the girl was murdered, that to look for a body. She helped them shift their investigation. So that was, I don't know if any of you have watched recently, in about 2 weeks ago, ITV drama Honor. So Diana had a role in that movie, not as Diana, but her character was had a role in Honor in the ITV drama. So this is just to show how important it is to work with the with organizations, BME organizations and women's organizations, and see things from their own perspective, and because they would be a party to trust and learn from, because they are part of that community. We understand these harmful practices, how not as understand in justifying them, but we know why they're happening, how they're happening, the dynamics of them. So this is why we come in, like we are so trusted, and like with Ascent project and other MOPAC projects, and we work in partnerships. So we have more than 22, we work more than 20 to 25 BME organizations, and they are all, have their own expertise, their own knowledge, and we all work in partnership to raise awareness and safeguard women and girls going through HPV in particular, and harmful practices in general. And at the moment, ICRO is actually we are very much on a big campaign called End Child Marriage, because we want to end child marriage in the UK. UK is one of the European countries where child marriage is still allowed, and unlike our neighbours in Germany and France, in where age marriage is way up to 18 years old. So we are, and our ambassador is a survivor, is Paizi Mahmoud. She's our colleague. She's the campaigner for child marriage, and she's the sister of Banaz Mahmoud, the murdered Banaz Mahmoud. So she, and we are very much, in the middle of it. We have like thousands. I didn't check this morning, the signatories, how many signatures we've got, but it's like we're talking thousands and thousands joining us, of people, supporters joining us to end child marriage. So in the UK. So this is in general what ICRO does, who we are, how we work, but also we have the first refuge for Middle Easterns and North African women in the UK. So we have 8 beds for single women fleeing forced marriage, honor-based violence or domestic abuse. We do take pregnant women, but at the point of, of giving birth, then the woman is rehoused outside the refuge. So it's a refuge for single women. Can I have, please, the next slide? Thank you. So within my role as an IDVA specializing in FGM, I work a lot with migrant women. All of my clients, I would say, are migrant women, although at a certain point they may become British or actually were born in the UK but were taken back years ago, 20, 30 years ago, to their parents' countries of origin, and were subjected to the harmful practice of FGM. So it's very important that I talk to you today about terminology, because basically it is we know it as FGMC for cutting. We always at ICRO prefer to use FGM. However, when working with women, let's say a woman from the Middle East, if she's from Egypt or the sub-Saharan countries such as Sudan or Somalia, so we always call it a tahara or khitan, which means circumcision. It's a lot of young survivors from the Middle East call it a female operation. She would say, I have had female operation. It's It's also called Sunnah. Sunnah, which is an Arabic word for, which means in the way of the Prophet Muhammad. Whatever the Prophet Muhammad did at the time, it's not about Quran, it's about his behavior. It's not like they're not verses or anything. With Sunnah is any behaviors he had in, during his life, such as wearing white to prayers. So Muslims nowadays like to wear white to prayers, just to follow on his footsteps, and they call it Sunnah. They like to grow a beard. It's not an Islamic requirement to grow a beard, but for Muslims it's Sunnah because the Prophet Muhammad had always had, I think, a beard. That's what we say. The way they eat, the way they carry themselves, and it's all because of Sunnah. The terminology circumcision, why we don't like using it is because for us, for all women, women's organizations, my colleagues, but also campaigners out there, we don't like to use the terminology circumcision because it normalizes the practice, and it's like comparing it to male circumcision, which obviously, we all know, we can't compare it to male circumcision because there is no parallel between the two. So, but also, I don't really call it Sunnah because for most of our Muslim survivors, that is in a way, it indicates that this has, it's like an Islamic requirement, which is not. Religion has nothing to do with FGM. It is associated with Islam in sub-Saharan countries. They always say it's Sunnah, 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 but also this is how women and girls in those communities have been misled to believe that this is to be a good Muslim, a good wife later on is to be circumcised, to be cut. So, for instance, is the case when we work with women, we always, or obviously we have FGM question on all our assessment tools and forms. We always ask about FGM, but obviously if you're talking to a Kurdish woman, to an Arabic speaking woman, is she from the Middle East? Is she Muslim? Is she Christian? Is she from sub-Saharan country? So we do use khitan, tahara, sunnah, circumcision, because this terminology does not exist in the Middle East. FGM does not exist, this terminology, FGM. It's very much a westernized, not westernized, it's a Western terminology, medical or maybe scientific terminology. So they don't know this word. So, so this is how we do our assessments. We always ask about FGM. And sometimes you ask women, you say, have you had FGM? What is FGM? Circumcision. No, I haven't had circumcision. However, yes, I did have Sunnah. Sunnah, it's type 1. It's type 1, which is the pricking, the cutting of the clitoris, pricking, or it's not the type 2, 3, where it involves cutting, stitching, and repositioning of the labia, minora and majora, and narrowing the vaginal opening, which is the most devastating types of all, type 3, 2. So this is very important that we work when we do our assessments to speak the survivors' language. And taking into account their country of origin, and where they come from, what language do they speak, what religion they faith they have. So these are very important. It helps us a lot to identify risks, to identify survivors, and help us also do our work and safely plan for their support. And coming back to Islam, or I was going to say, like, as we all know, FGM predates Islam, predates all religions. So, for instance, if we take the case of Egypt, I have worked a lot with survivors from Egypt. Egypt, we have Copts, Christians, Muslims. They and 95% of women have undergone FGM. So it's not about what faith you hold, what religion you follow, what faith you have. It's about what region you are from. You can be Christian, Egyptian, and be have undergone an FGM, or Copt, or it could be that you are Muslim. So that's what we found really. So we always try and explain that there is, please there is not any, you know, any parallel or any connections between FGM and any religion. So that's why it's very important to watch terminology, what you know, how we assess women survivors, because this is about identifying risk and trying to understand what these women have, you know, have endured, and their root and their experiences are very much, you know, they're important. Each of them is important, and understanding them, listening to them is very important too. Can I have the next slide, please? So yeah, we talked a lot about types. I'm not going to go to explain to you what is type 1, 2, 3 or 4. Takes a bit, we need about 4 slides for that. So mainly at ICRU, we work with survivors from North Africa, Middle East, and wider, you know, some Asian countries and African countries in general. So we do have all types. So we have seen, and we still see all types of FGM. As we know, FGM is like an attack. It's the most initial type of abuse perpetrated on girls, on female bodies. So you know, and FGM is an attack on female genital organs. And it's, as I said, it's the most initial form of violence on girls and in general. When we assess women with FGM, as I said earlier, referring to terminology, it's very important that we look at all types, because this is where we understand whether this woman has had type 1, 2, 3 or 4, because you can come across all of them, you know, and it's very type 1, 2 and 3 is prevalent for amongst our you know, migrant women we support. Type 3, I would say, is more in Egypt and sub-Saharan countries such as Sudan, Somalia, and obviously other African countries. Then I'm not going to talk to you about atekmid, because atekmid is a type of harmful practice, type 4 FGM, where we insert some sand on a baby, a girl. On her 4th day, we start inserting sand in her labia, inside her vagina, and the mother, the grandmother, would be doing this, and until the age of 4 months. And it is only practiced in Yemen. So for a survivor wouldn't know. The only people who would know about atekmid or would need to know about it actually are health visitors and doctors, not counselors, not psychologists, because a survivor would never remember that she had undergone atekmid. So that's not really our, you know, it's not very relevant to this, what we're talking about today. Then we have at-tasfih. At-tasfih, can I have the next slide, please? I want to talk to you about at-tasfih. Yeah, at-tasfih, we can go to the next one, please. Looking at at-tasfih. Yes. So with at-tasfih, it's a practice, it's a ritual, it's a substitute to cutting, it's a substitute to FGM, and it's only practiced in Tunisia, Algeria, and some parts of Morocco. So this is about preserving girls. It's a belief, it's a ritual, practiced as a ritual, and it is a belief that by doing at-tasfih we can actually preserve a girl's purity and therefore present her to her future husband as a pure bride. So and this is to avoid honor, shame, and preserve family's honor and the person's honor, her family's honor, and the community's honor. So it is a ritual where we actually cut in terms of harm, it's less less harmful than type 1, 2, 3, because it doesn't involve any really cutting of any labia or any parts of the genital organs. However, it is they take a razor blade and they cut about 3 small cuts inside the inner thigh of the girl, and they put something like sugar on top of it, and they make the girl actually eat that sugar. Then there is a lock pad involved, so they position it on the top of the wound and close it down. This is to give the impression and to make the girl believe that she is closed up forever until this ritual is reversed again on her wedding day. So it is very crazy. It's very much still I would say practiced, and I recently came across, since 2019, late 2019 to today, I have had 4 tasfih survivors. I have worked with 4 tasfih survivors. So it's about stopping, girls engaging in premarital sexual intercourse and preserve their, or maybe stop them from having any sexual activity, whether it's wanted or unwanted. And it's a way of protecting them in a way, and protecting honor, their family's honor. So this is what it is, and it does have a big impact psychologically, and it's a trauma for a girl, and it does create a lot of it has a psychological impact. By talking to these survivors, we actually understand that it does impact on their physical health, sexual health, and it may also create a lot of difficulties, marital rape. It could lead to domestic abuse and honor-based violence also within, because just of this practice. It's very much not known to services, including NHS and health services, I mean, in general. It's only a couple, about 2-3 organizations working on it, and it's also called Rabat. Sometimes they call it Rabat for closure, which means closure. It's a ritual. It's very, as I said, in terms of harm, it's less harmful, but it is still child abuse. It is still extremely, could have a very bad impact on a person's health, physical health or psychological health, and therefore mental health also. Could we move to the next slide, please?
Sorry, Salma.
Yep.
Before we move on, I'm afraid we've really overrun.
Yeah.
We've only got 5 minutes for the rest of your slides.
Oh,
so
gee.
do you want to choose, please bear that in mind, because we need to finish.
Okay. Okay, shall we go to okay, we're not going to talk about legality, and shall we go to accessing the affected communities, because I wanted to talk about medicalization of GM, because it's very much a health issue, medical issue and health issue. So maybe accessing the affected communities. So why it's very important that we say, for instance, statutory services such as social services, police, and health providers, have to work alongside, and that's the whole point of Ascent project, is to for these to do a lot of institutional advocacy, and for them to understand these traditional harmful practices and confiding us and work with us. So because work with BME, I mean in general, I don't mean ICO, but with the BME agencies. So this is to have access to the affected communities. It will facilitate a social worker's job to have someone like ICRO, Ashiana, or Emichi, or laws, or to be involved in their assessments, and how it will help them a lot. So but also there is the use of language. So we always that's why we focused on terminology and what type of also language used when approaching such subjects, and in particular FGM and other harmful practices, not to accuse the person, their families, or blame them, or insult them, or talk in a bad way about, you know, the practice itself in front of a survivor. So we have to focus on facts, safeguarding, and very much on legality. We do a lot of work in the community, and we do raise a lot of you know, awareness. We do workshops, and you know, we form ambassadors and champions, and we always say focus legality on legality, facts of FGM, the physical facts, psychological facts, the facts, because we can see them, we can treat them, we can look at them. And then we have also legality. It's very important for migrant families to understand that FGM is illegal. It is a criminal offense. Many parents do not have that understanding, do not have that awareness. So it's very important for statutory, that is why it's important for statutory agencies to work alongside BME, voluntary you know, services, to have a you know, positive outcome and access the affected communities. Yeah, because talking about facts and legislation will make people think about the practice. This is a fact. Look at it. Look what we're doing. We can abandon this practice because this shouldn't be part of our universe. This we should be reading. By now, we should be reading about FGM and harmful practices in books. It should be part of history of our, you know, books, not something that is actually quite alive and very prevalent and still very much practiced. So focus on educating the affected communities in order to achieve behavior change. So we have to engage in a dialogue with them and listen to survivors, listen, acknowledge their pain, acknowledge all types. Type 1, I'm going to tell you, is not acknowledged, and in particular by health services, because it is not visual. So I'd love to tell you more, but thank you. I know we need a whole session. Thank you very much for having me and giving me this opportunity to talk about my work and FGM in particular. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Selma. I'm really sorry to rush you, and I have been to your training before where, you know, we can have a whole session from ICRO. But due to it was just a smaller presentation, we're just going to move on to Livia, who is within our own trust as a clinical psychologist in the Traumatic Stress Clinic. Thank you so much, Livia, and we know that we've limited your time now.
No worries. Thank you very much, Shirley and Philippa, for asking me to speak and to share a little bit about our experience at the Traumatic Stress Clinic. And I suppose I will, yes, I do have quite a lot of slides, and I will just try to condense what I was going to speak about to hopefully the main points, which is to share a little bit of our experience at the Traumatic Stress Clinic about asking about FGM and some of what we've learned from our service users in terms of how they found those conversations and what they believe we as healthcare professionals should know, and why we're well placed to be having these conversations now. So next slide, please. So Selma's already covered quite a lot about what FGM is. So I'm going to skip the next couple of slides a little bit because they just outline a little bit both what the practice is and the different terminology that's used. I'll pause on this one, Caroline. Thank you. Caroline's our slide master in the background, working really hard. So what this comes from clients at the Traumatic Stress Clinic, what they felt that we as health and social care professionals need to know. They wanted us, as Selma outlined, to know that there are different, there's different terminology, there are different words that women are used to using. So it would be really important for us to be able to, rather than just calling it circumcision or FGM, to have to know what some of these terms are when we open the conversation. Would it be okay to go back to that slide about terminology? So yeah, different ways of asking about it. He wanted us to know about the barriers women face in terms of getting help. that many times they do not know that help is available. They have not been asked previously by different professionals, and they might feel embarrassment or shyness, or might find it difficult to initiate conversations about FGMs or related problems themselves, and they wanted us might not know that there are specialist services available and to support them with some of the problems related to FGM, which are both physical health problems like chronic pain, UTIs, difficulties with conception, with ongoing incontinence. One of my clients has, and wasn't linking it to potentially her experience of FGM, but also some of the emotional difficulties. There was some really I'm not going to have time to go into it, but some of the qualitative research that has been done with some women in the Netherlands, some of the experiences that they talk about when they experience pain that's associated with FGM, and then having and starting to shake and being taken straight back there. I mean, it's a very eloquent description of what we would conceptualize as a flashback to a very traumatic experience. So. Very, very strong psychological impacts as well as the physical ones. And they wanted us to know, as Selma has outlined, about some of the complexities and some of the cultural and religious beliefs and influences on FGM, and some of the context that they grew up in, that may have influenced why their communities, why some of the women in their life, including, would have chosen from in terms of the context and the background that was happening around it, in order to be able to have these conversations sensitively. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the next two slides will outline some of the physical and psychological consequences and impacts of FGM. You can move through them quite quickly, actually, because what I would really like to talk about is why is this relevant to us in mental health services? Why is it important to ask? So as health professionals, we do have a mandatory obligation now to report historical cases of FGM to the National Statistics Database, and the way that those reports get collated from Candy are actually through the care notes. So there's a tab, or there's a specific form that we're asked to fill in care notes in the risk assessment tab. And of course, it's also for safeguarding women and girls who might potentially be at risk of FGM, who come from families and communities where that is practiced. And it's also because many of the women that we work with face ongoing difficulties. So it's not just acute at the time of FGM being performed when they were younger, but many of them face ongoing consequences and sequelae of having the procedure. And it needs to be incorporated, particularly that, for the physical health problems and psychological, they can be signposted to specialist services, and many of the women that we spoke with at the TSC welcomed that. And for that, and also the psychological impact and related difficulties, whether it might be PTSD, but it might also be ongoing sexual difficulties, relationships, how it affects them, etc., needs to be incorporated into our formulations, into our psychological work with our clients. So there is a lot more guidance in terms of how to ask, what do we ask, next slide, please. This is drawn from the Royal College of Nursing guidelines. And again underlines the importance of using a variety of different terms to find a mutually understandable one when we're speaking to our clients about this. But if there's a history of FGM or cutting in their family or in their community, if they have had this themselves. Next slide, please. And then asking about any current problems that they might still be experiencing in relation to this now, which might include infections, pain, menstrual difficulties, incontinence, infertility, relationship difficulties, sexual problems, and whether they have spoken to doctors about any of these difficulties, whether they might like medical advice and signposting to specialist services, or whether they might like to be referred now for specialist support. I might just fast forward, Caroline, to slide 13, if that's okay. I'll just share a little bit about an audit that we have done at the Traumatic Stress Clinic. So it's screening at the Traumatic Stress Clinic. So we had spoken to 11 different service users from a variety of countries, origin, 10 of whom have had FGM, and one who had run away from home due to the threat of having FGM. And I think that the headlines really are, if I had to really condense it, is just that many of them are continuing to experience difficulties relating to having undergone FGM, including infections and pain, sexual problems and difficulties, obstetric difficulties effectively. It can be a very, very difficult conversation for women to initiate. And most women, just going on to the next slide, really welcomed us having bringing it in and asking them about their experience, and many of them welcomed the opportunity to learn more about specialist services and help and support and advice available, and some welcomed a referral. I do just like, if you want to fast forward to the very end, Caroline, I'll just end with a couple of slides with further information and guidance. And what I'll do as well, if I'm able to, I'll pop my email into the chat box, because I'm very mindful that I've rushed through a lot of material just because we are out of time. But if you'd like some more information about anything that I've said or our experience at the TSC, please drop me an email, and I would be very happy to share a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Livia, so much. I don't know whether I'm live again, and you know, I feel it's very disrespectful to you all to have rushed you, to Selma, to Polly, to Livia, to Andy, who couldn't get on and is with us now. This isn't how we wanted to run the event, but it has been really fantastic hearing what we can, and that all these amazing women, and I'm sure men out there, are kind of campaigning to build this trauma-informed organisation, and it's really kind of heartfelt to see the work you're doing at the Traumatic Stress Clinic, and that we can learn from you, because of course everyone can't get to the trauma clinic, and trauma-informed ideas are about every single one of us behaving in a way that soothes and validates people's experience, not just those who get to trauma therapy. It is 1 o'clock, so I'm just going to say thank you so much. We will try and send an apology to everybody who couldn't get on. We may repeat, it may have been recorded, and thank you, Caroline, particularly for helping us with the slides. This must be stressful and exhausting, and so to everyone, thank you so much. And we hope to see you again, and we'll make sure it's much better in terms of the technology, but not better in terms of the amazing presenters. So thank you.